Welcome to the SportsPro podcast.
Hi everyone, and welcome once again to the SportsPro podcast. My name is Eoin Connolly. I'm the editor-at-large at SportsPro. I hope you're all very well. We're going to be turning our attention this week to the business of cycling. We have a very heavily delayed Tour de France departing towards the end of this week as we're speaking, heading through the French countryside and beyond for the next 3 weeks or so. But it's obviously been a very heavily time-shifted calendar for cycling in general, creating a lot of challenges for all the stakeholders in that sport. To take us through what the next few weeks are going to be like as a broadcast experience and a little bit, explain a little bit what the changes to this year's schedule have triggered through the business of cycling. We have Guy Voisin, who is the Director of Cycling at Eurosport and the Head of GCN Racing at Play Sports Network. Hello, Guy.
Hello.
And we've got Mike Rich, who's the Head of Sports Marketing Solutions at Discovery and Eurosport. Hi, Mike.
Hello, Owen.
We're going to be getting a team perspective a little bit later on from Darach McQuaid, who's the chairman of GreenEdge. But yeah, we're going to be focusing on the media side of things for this first part of the podcast, guys. And where are you at the moment with preparations for the Tour de France, and how? I guess it's a big nebulous question to start with, but how does it compare with what you might have expected in an ordinary 2020 around about June, July time to be going into this Grand Tour?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I'd say we're at about the same place, except we have to take into consideration all these extra details of safety and security. So we do have people on site. ASO, who is the producers of the Tour de France, as you probably well know, have laid down many rules, and for us to have those people on site, for example, we had to make sure our staff and crew were in France 14 days in advance. So they've left a few weeks ago, are living in France at the moment to be sure that they're COVID free, and they're being tested regularly to be sure that they're COVID free and able to talk to the racers. Now, at the race itself, obviously there's all kinds of limitations. We have booths where we're allowed to send our reporters in to talk to the racers as they walk by, whereas normally we'd be able to go and visit them at the buses or in their hotels after hours. But this year it's a limiting experience. Now, as a broadcaster, we have to get original and try to figure out different ways to do things. So there's the obvious Zoom calls from the hotels in the evenings. We're going to be following certain riders with rider diaries that we've hooked up. We have our reporters, and amongst our reporters, we have a recent retiree from the peloton, Bernie Eisel, who can attract some attention and bring in his old mates and old teammates to talk to us. So I think we're in a really good place, and I think that we're going to do our community of cycling fans very proud. On the broadcast side, back home, we've gone above and beyond. We've pushed to digital, and we have now on our digital platforms taken the time throughout the COVID crisis to make sure we have 7 languages on all the digital events. So even if it's not the Tour de France, it's the other races that are happening because we have clashes, we'll be able to have all of the racing on our digital platforms in 7 languages, and all to better serve our clients and all to better serve the community. So I think we're in a really good place for the Tour de France, to answer the question directly. And I think we're in a really good place for the entire packed season of those the 200 days of cycling that are going to happen in the next 100 days.
When it comes to the restrictions on travel, some of the restrictions on contact that you've alluded to there, how is how does it affect cycling differently from other sports that have gone first? Obviously, you're not in purpose-built facilities for one thing. You're out in the open. you're sending teams kind of traveling large distances just to keep up with the peloton. What changes do you have to or what challenges, sorry, do you have to account for when you're covering the sport?
Well, everybody has to, so this is it's almost a question for the UCI and the sports and the race organizers, right? But they're creating bubbles, so all the teams are in specific bubbles, whereas before, they could mix it up in hotels, and you have tons of stories from the Tour de France where teams are sleeping 4 guys to a room and stuff like this. Uh, right now, it's extremely bubble oriented. So every team's got their bubble. We're not allowed to penetrate it. We're not allowed to talk to them within if we're not near their bubble on the Tour de France specifically, right? In other races, it's a little bit easier going. But as I was saying earlier, all the teams had to have their riders and mechanics and masseurs and soigneurs and anybody who works with the team who's going to be on site, the cooks, whatever. They're all tested regularly, and in the Tour de France case particular, any 2 people that test positive in the team, that team is out of the race. And interestingly, the cases are identified quite early, and there's races who are identified before even traveling to the race that they may be COVID positive. So I think the people in charge, the authorities, and I feel they're doing a pretty decent job at getting that done and getting on top of it to make sure that we get the maximum amount of racing and that we get through, the 9 weeks ahead of us of the 3 grand tours without any massive problems.
Obviously, we're talking at the end of August. We're going into a race that's going to be running through the first 3 weeks of September instead of running through July. There's been a massive amount of disruption to Eurosport's entire programming slate, as there has for every broadcaster in sport everywhere. What's that done to your kind of planning, basically, to your strategy through this summer? How have you managed to build a narrative, or how have you worked to build a narrative, and what other kind of programming decisions have you had to make over the last few months to account for that lack of live cycling?
Yeah, I'm not going to lie to you. It was a rough summer. I didn't expect this summer to be is hard, so it was almost harder than if we had the racing as normal. And I think you get that answer from a lot of people in a lot of different businesses. But we hit hard fast. We got on board with some digital partners to get some digital racing out there, esports, and then we went into what a lot of sport broadcasters did, into sort of history storytelling, where we wanted to retell stories from the Giro, so the best 21 stages of the Giro and over the last 15 years, and we brought in a whole digital aspect where we could go and get polls running through the races at the same time, and just create a different experience to review the past. Now, further than that, where I was personally really interested, and where the cycling team at Eurosport and GCN really jumped in, was, okay, how can we get ready for the return of sport, and how can we get ready for it technologically to be one step above everybody else? So, we constantly went after all of the women's cycling to make sure we had as much of it as possible, if not all of it, in the rights for the next years. Because I mean, the point was, okay, we have this period to concentrate on what's coming up. So we went after the women's cycling. We've gone after the cyclocross, because we want to expand, and we see the growing desire in our community of cyclocross fans. And then we said, okay, how can we bring it a step further? And that's where I come back to my point about the multilingual broadcasts on digital, is saying, okay, we're going to have a pack schedule where we won't be able to offer everything on a linear traditional broadcast, because, well, it's what it is, right? It's linear. And so when we have simultaneous events, how can we put them all on with 3 events in a day, 4 events in a day? So we concentrated on getting this multilingual broadcast, event-based commentary on all of our digital products, and then creating content around it. Same solution. So how do we get a broadcast such as the Breakaway in the UK on linear, when immediately after the Tour de France, we're going to go live to tennis in the U.S. Open, which is a huge attraction for Eurosport as well. So let's push that broadcast on to the digital platform to really offer the full breadth of experience from Bradley Wiggins and from Orla Schweeney and Dan Lloyd, to make sure that we have that team, GCN and Eurosport, on the digital side, creating a show that really goes through the steps of the race and really takes a look at the race in depth.
Mike, I want to bring you in at this point. I mean, what kind of pressures did all of this create for you over this summer, when you had a whole season of programming, and you will have had partners involved in that, and you will have had targets for audiences as well that just become completely irrelevant at this point. But then you again have to shift back into live programming mode later in the year. What approach did you take to that on your side?
Yeah, look, I'd echo Guy's point that I'm not going to lie, it's been a challenging few months as it relates to live sport. But I think, look, I think from my perspective, what's been really interesting is the clients that we work with tend to break down into sort of three broad buckets. And if I was to sort of maybe use a sporting analogy, it's been a little bit like sort of prepping for the start of a race. We've had some brands that have been in sort of get set mode. Travel and tourism sector has obviously been hit extremely hard, and we've been sort of working with them on pending plans for Q4 into 21. So they've been in the sort of get set mode, or it's on your marks mode. In terms of kind of getting set, we've had brands like luxury and automotive where they've been on a sort of maintenance path during the COVID period. But interestingly, we've had quite a few brands in the logistics sector, in the kind of digital entertainment space, in the betting space that have actually remained very active across the period. And I think Zwift will be a classic case in point, where we're working very closely with them on a brand partnership level, but also expanding that brand partnership for them to become a content provider as well, running some virtual racing during the lockdown. But um, I mean, for me, it's been a very challenging few months. But at the moment, I would say there's just an immense amount of pent up excitement at the prospect of live sport coming back, and advertisers are very keen to capitalize on that level of excitement with our audiences. And we're just gearing up to work with those brand partners to make sure that we maximize the level of engagement that we can deliver with our audiences for their commercial messages. So super optimistic actually for Q4.
Yeah, what did you learn from that quarter? It was almost a full quarter of non-live content where you were leaning on original programming, leaning on the archives, leaning on some of the more improvised stuff that you've talked about there with, the digital races and so on. What did you learn about the performance of that type of programming on the kind of platforms that Discovery and Eurosport have to hand?
Look, to be brutally honest, nothing compares to live. There is no getting away from live, but certainly our .com product has performed extremely well in terms of the stories around sport. And I think one of the joys of my position is I have a level of oversight of our wider discovery portfolio as well. And we managed to work with a number of advertisers across some of our lifestyle product, consumption of food and home, has actually seen significant uplift over the period. So, I mean, really, it was just a case of delivering what we could where we could, pivoting with those brands to maintain their commercial messages where they were up for it, and then getting ready for the return of live sport as best we could.
And if I may, on that point, is that our other cycling brand, GCN, saw a massive increase in their viewership and the community around the globe during that period. So even if we weren't in live sports, which is an incredible an incredible attraction to us and super important, GCN, which is got the biggest cycling community in the world right now, was doing extremely well and was performing beyond expectation.
Yeah, and I mean, you make a very good point, Guy. I mean, I would echo that. I mean, from a commercial perspective, I think it's been very interesting to see um, as a participation sport, cycling consumption has gone up massively during the COVID period, with also the consumption of bikes and purchase of bike equipment. So again, for me, that that plays into an idea that says that with live cycling coming back, our commercial partners have a real opportunity to build on that appetite.
Yeah, I want to get into some of that crossover, the kind of crossover between elite and performance, what I suppose you could call performance lifestyle cycling, with people who are pushing it a bit further, and then people who are just getting into the sport and, you know, bringing those communities together on GCN and across Play Sports universe. But first of all, I mean, that deal between Discovery and Play Sports happened, where are we? The start of last year. What stage have we got to with the integration of those brands, and what kind of a cycling product is it looking like Discovery is going to have now?
So as far as integration goes, I mean, it's a really big company, Eurosport and Discovery, with a smaller company like GCN, but and mindsets that are completely different, right? So GCN is hyper fast turnarounds and it's all digital. It's very social, Facebook oriented, and very young vibe. Eurosport is the more traditional and very high quality broadcast vibe, and that's, I think, the easiest way for me to describe both. So the integration at first, I'm not going to lie, was not easy, right? Especially on the engineering side, the engineers didn't understand how GCN worked, and GCN didn't understand how we worked. And I was actually head of GCN Racing and got pulled over to the Eurosport side to kind of facilitate this whole thing at first. And up to now, I'd say it's going surprisingly well. And it's even better than surprisingly well. In the last, I'd say the last 10 months, the teams are really starting to attract each other's qualities. So the GCN side, we've got a small broadcast team that are really locking into the live producers of Eurosport, and really locking into the engineers of Eurosport, and the engineers of Eurosport are really starting to get involved in how GCN does things, and that communication has really really augmented to a point that I feel we're in an incredibly positive place, to the point, as an example, that during the COVID crisis, some of the engineering team on the Discovery side communicated with the GCN team to see how they could facilitate getting certain type of digital races and others on air, and we piled them in a virtual room together, and they came out with some solutions that were really incredible, and that we were able to use to broadcast the Zwift Tour for All or the Giro classic stages, and that now have flowed into what we do for our digital and linear platforms, with things that we're testing now to be even more performant ready, if you will, for our community.
You're listening to the SportsPro podcast.
So is it looking like at this stage we're going to have something where each of those brands has a place basically in what Discovery is trying to do in cycling, rather than bringing something together and having a big kind of totemic vertical thing that tries to serve everybody?
I think we already do have a place for both brands, and Mike will probably be able to answer it better than I on a certain part here, especially the commercial side. But I think we already have a very solid identity with both brands, and they both have a place. So, for example, GCN is not only a European brand, as Eurosport is very much that 71 countries that we serve. GCN is global. GCN is also a highly lifestyle brand, and I think that's got its own place right there. And the fact that we're with GCN, that we're touching on racing, is due to the relationship with Eurosport, and that they can go out and reach all the communities that Eurosport doesn't reach at the moment. throughout the rest of the world, where Eurosport is I mean, got that reputation and that solidity in Europe. And yeah, I think there's a place for both. And I'll let Mike. I'll hand over to Mike.
Yeah, I mean, I think your totem analogy certainly, as it relates to our brand partners, is a good one. The for me, the GCN relationship just presents us with a fantastic opportunity to deliver really creative solutions to our commercial partners. And that's everything from the full live experience through to the ancillary programming that we create on linear, through to social, through to digital, through to on demand, through to podcasts. And certainly the way I look at our business construct is that we've got incredibly strong passion vertical in cycling, and the brand partners that we work with want to capitalize on the passion that our audiences have. And the Eurosport product combined with the GCN product just allows us to engage with consumers through every touch point, and hopefully deliver sort of all of the requirements that they want, and weave what we think are hopefully really strong commercial messages in, because we've heavily committed to building out a creative solutions function within our partnership team. So we work with our brand partners to make sure that we can integrate their messaging into our output in a meaningful way that adds some value to our consumer experience.
What are some of the ways? I mean, you talked about some of the creativity you had to find in the early stages of the pandemic, and just purely getting some of these digital events together, and using people from the Eurosport and GCN side to do that. But what are some of the other ways that the last few months have given you an opportunity to think about how these different parts of the Discovery cycling world can come together?
Yeah, it's it's a difficult question, and it's because I live with it day to day. So it's like watching your child grow up. You suddenly realize that 5 years later that kid is like 5 years old, and it's half a meter and a half tall or something, right? It's just oh geez, I didn't think of that before, and now it just seems so natural. So a big part of it is to me is that we had to start thinking about our relationship with the athletes a little closer. We had to start thinking about how do we see ourselves as a broadcaster a little bit further along, and how do we represent the different entities in cycling. So like the different the cyclocross and the track cycling, and I think in a personal reflection, that's where I went with it and brought it to my team, as how do we going to go and look at all the cycling that's not represented, so that it is not the man's road racing cycling, if you will, and how are we going to bring that to the community, make sure it's understood, make sure it's properly represented, and so that everybody realizes how exciting those events and that type of cycling is. And that's where we're really headed, and that's what we when we call ourselves the home of cycling on Eurosport and GCN, the global cycling network. I think we have to look at everything, and GCN's been on this path for a long time in the lifestyle area. They cover the epic adventures and the lifestyle and the track, and I mean you can get anything on GCN, right? They've got that covered on the lifestyle. And so how do I, as the director of cycling at Eurosport, bring that kind of vibe over in racing and to touch it? And then you have to, in my opinion, you have to get closer to the athletes, you have to get closer to the race organizers, and even encourage races that for example, we decided to do a test with a gang out of Berlin called the Rad Race, and they have a race with fixed gear bicycles, no brakes, and on a go-kart track in the middle of February. And it's called the Last Man Standing. And we just decided we'd broadcast it, and discovered that, hey, our viewership, our community is really interested in this race. They watched it in mass and loved it. And so, like, I've been in contact with them. How can we maybe create more events of this kind? How can we create perhaps a series? This type of it was really a bit of time to sit down, look at it, and start to go, okay, where are we going to go with the future of cycling? Let's not just be traditional. Let's not just say, okay, we're going to do men's races, throughout the year. Let's do all kinds of cycling. I think that's really what we took away, from that little point of time. We were able to kind of step back and say, okay, there is no live racing, so let's get a couple of things going. Let's make sure that we don't let go of our track, to make sure that we have stuff on air and that people are interested in stuff. But at the same time, let's start concentrating on where we're going to go as a broadcasters.
And Mike, something that you talked about a bit earlier was the growth of cycling as a lifestyle, as a means of transport, really, for a lot of people. That's something that we expect will have been accelerated in a lot of cities, in particular by this crisis. What are the implications of that commercially, and what is it? How does it change your focus on what you want to do with programming, but also with other kind of commercial solutions over the next few years?
Yeah, it's a good question. To be perfectly honest, I don't think it changes our focus at all. What it does do is it reinforces the fact that the major commitment that we've made to cycling, to be brutally honest, has been a good one. The interest levels are on the rise across, I guess, every level of the industry, and certainly for me, from a commercial perspective, the only thing that's been missing over the last couple of months has been the live piece. As Guy was saying, GCN has seen some record numbers in terms of consumption of their video product, their educational pieces around cycling, all of the sort of component parts that your day-to-day cyclist wants to consume. And so for us commercially, having live sport come back is kind of the icing on the cake, and what we hope it will be a real springboard to the development of our of that cycling passion vertical that we have, and a really good precursor into what is going to be a massively packed schedule for Q4, but also takes us into the run into Tokyo 2020, which we're sort of heavily in the midst of planning for now. So in some respects, I think it's quite hard to draw positives out of the kind of period of pandemic that we've been through. But certainly, I really do think cycling is going to get a real bump as we start to see things come back to normal.
Okay, I want to bring it back just before or just as we wrap up. Bring it back to this year's Tour de France, and what do you hope to learn out of the next few weeks, Guy? I think one of the things that's been very striking for a lot of broadcasters over the last few months is how much they've had to ramp up their activities in remote production, for example. Just find different ways of doing things, of getting the on-screen product together, and also distributing and editing and everything else, perhaps in different locations. What are some of the things that you're hoping to get out of it from a technical perspective?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and technically, I'm extremely lucky because Eurosport has been and has been planning and been working on this for years, and their remote broadcast possibilities are far beyond, I think, most broadcasters, to be totally honest. They are, and we're even, there's going to be taking a step further in a few months and another step further in a few months after that. So the engineering team are very, very intelligent people, much more intelligent than I, and they have really been making my life a lot easier for all the requests I put in and challenges we all the sports of Eurosport have been asking of them. They've been stepping it up. So it's not so much what I'm going to learn as a remote broadcaster, because, like I was saying, I think Eurosports is on their way to wrapping that part of the market up. They're going to be the top of the top, and that's no doubt. What I'm going to have to take away is how creatively can I use those tools, right? And how creatively how can I look at it with the team, with GCN, who are have got this hive mind of cyclist fanatics. Like there's 200 cyclist fanatics over at GCN, and then the team at Eurosport. How can we harness all that creativity and then mix it up with live racing? It's been the focus for the last year and a bit, and it's going to continue to be, and that's what we're trying new things at this tour, and to communicate with the riders, and how do we use the riders. And I mean, for example, if you look at on the GCN Race Pass right now, they have the World of Cycling show. They have these rider diaries with Elia Viviani and his partner, and Tom Skuins, that are hyper creative and really bring you into the peloton and are super fun to watch, and yet they're not completely pro cycling type of vibe. It's really a bit of a lifestyle. So I think that's where we have to head, and we have to bring that entertainment factor to the community, as well as the live race, and because they just, it's a marriage made in heaven, and I think we have this incredible opportunity to do so.
Guys, what are your targets for the next 3 weeks and for the rest of the cycling season?
Oh, for me, there's a pretty simple base level. I hope the event goes off safely, and the target for me is that we can deliver the level of expectation that our commercial partners are anticipating, because it's been a pretty dry and barren road over the last couple of months. So for me, just the target is making sure that we deliver effectively to all our partners and capitalize on what I think is going to be a super exciting next 3 weeks.
Yeah, I echo Mike, and really, if I can add anything, it's that I just hope we really communicate, and I know we will, but I really hope we communicate all of the desires to our community of cycling fanatics out there, and that they get to watch all the races they want. That they have the Eurosport Digital Open on one, the Linear Open on the other, GCN app open on the other, and they can watch 3 races in the same day on the 25th of October. That type of stuff. Yeah, I hope that everybody gets, a satisfying experience.
Okay. Thanks very much, guys. We're going to be hearing just after the break from someone who's hoping for a different kind of satisfaction out of the race. He's Darach McQuaid, who is the chairman of GreenEdge Cycling, who'll be sending the Mitchelton-Scott team out to France, Australian based. Obviously, they have World Tour teams in men's and women's cycling. So lots to talk about there, about his experiences of this disrupted summer and what he hopes is to come for cycling commercially in the next couple of years as well. That's coming up just after this.
Help us spread the word about the SportsPro podcast. Subscribe, like and share our content on social. Join the conversation on Twitter with the hashtag SportsProPod. And if you're enjoying our work, why not leave us a rating and a nice review on your podcast platform of choice? And if you want to get in touch, you can send us an email, podcast@sportspromedia.com. The SportsPro podcast. We're listening too.
Darach McQuaid, chairman of GreenEdge Cycling, welcome to the SportsPro podcast.
Good to be with you.
Thanks for joining us, Darach. Obviously, it's an incredibly busy week in the life of a World Tour cycling operation, heading into the Tour de France, a slightly different time of year than we're used to for the big one. But what have preparations been like going into this kind of this September tour?
Well, it certainly has been an unusual year, both from a organizational point of view, from a commercial point of view, and from a sporting point of view with the athletes and their preparation. The COVID-19 has thrown up a lot of challenges. The calendar has been truncated, so to speak, with a reboot of the 2020 season in late July, early August. Our team came out of the traps pretty well. We won a lot of races, so the riders have clearly had a good lockdown, so to speak. So we're going into the tour in pretty confident. I'm here at the service course in Varese, and just yesterday and today, all of our team vehicles left for Nice. So it was a pretty exciting time around the team headquarters, and we're looking forward to hopefully starting in Nice and making it all the way to Paris.
Yeah, what kind of how many layers of additional planning have you had to put in for the tour, given all the kind of COVID secure protocols and everything else?
We've since the lockdown, we independently started our own planning for when the season would restart. So we've had a full COVID-19 planning team put together, led by our UK-based Dr. David Holtz, and we're pretty proud that we're going to go to the Tour de France, and we're going to really know that we've done our absolute best to mitigate against any potential COVID-19 issues. Look, it's not possible to be 100% sure that nobody will pick the virus up, but we've really done a big job on creating our own what we call race safe plan, and with the other teams doing the same, and the organisation ASO putting in like a significant plan. We're guardedly optimistic that we'll make it all the way to Paris.
And with the difference in the numbers of people you're allowed to have around a facility at the moment, and obviously the distancing that you've got to put in place and everything else, what kind of decisions go into who's going to make the trip, not just to the tour, but obviously you've been involved in shorter races all through this month, where you're having to decide, okay, we'll send this group off to this race and this group off to this race. What's gone into some of those decisions?
Yeah, as part of our race safe plan, we've created several different what we would call bubbles within the team. I mean, just this morning as well, we had a set of vehicles and staff heading off to the Tour of Hungary, which starts later this week as well. So we've basically created a number of different sets of staff that will always travel together throughout this short and pretty intense season. So that's been a new challenge, but it's not an impossible task. And really getting down to racing, which is what our organisation is set up to do, is what it's all about. And once the riders are out there on the race course, it's somewhat back to normal. But when we get to our team hotel, when we go to a supermarket to buy race food, when we pull into a petrol station to fill up the team bus, team trucks, and team cars, it's all of that sort of non-racing element is what has changed slightly. But we're getting on with it, and we're staying positive. And I think when you look at what's going on in the world, for some semblance of normal racing, professional cycling to be happening, it certainly has been. So far, I've visited a couple of races, and it's been pretty well done. And I think the television, if anything, is somewhat even improved, because the riders are so desperate to get some good racing, and the racing has been pretty exciting.
What kind of collaboration has there been between the teams, obviously sharing best practice and so on, in what are very unusual times, with the UCI, and then with promoters like the ASO for the tour?
Well, I mean, everybody at the end of the day, you've got to row your own boat, and we set off in, as I said before, in advance of the season restart to create our own plan. The UCI, as the global governing body of the sport, have also put down the regulations, and then each individual organizer will have their own specific regulations, because at the end of the day, national governments in Switzerland or Hungary or France will have different policies. So it's a combination of all. Should, again, nothing is going to be 100% secure and safe, but it should lead to as safe a racing atmosphere as possible.
Mm. Now, you stepped into this role in July, so you didn't have the same kind of oversight as you do now when all the cancellations and postponements and so on kicked in back in the spring. But what were the implications of that financially for World Tour operations? Like what were the things that you had to get straight? What were your priorities in terms of ensuring the viability of the team when there was such uncertainty around racing?
Well, my previous incarnation with the team was commercial director, and I'm still heavily involved in the commercial side. And it became pretty obvious pretty soon back in February. In fact, the last main race which took place, we won with Adam Yates. The UAE Tour was when things really kicked off in February, and there was an actual lockdown at the race. And it doesn't take the brain of Britain to work out that a sport like cycling, the value for sponsors is the visibility from television and live races. And when that's not happening, sponsors naturally will come to us and say, okay, if this goes on for 3 or 4 or 5 months, there will be a financial consideration to look at. So we immediately in March kicked off an esport initiative, which was putting our riders who are in lockdown into Zwift races and Zwift rides with our fans. So we, I think, moved in a pretty agile way to try and create some pretty good visibility for our sponsors. But in the bigger scheme of things, we're used to every July the whole world's eyes turning to France for 3 weeks for Tour de France. And with that not happening, I've noticed in our commercial world for our team that our sponsors are now, when we're talking about next year, we're looking at including COVID clauses, and different commercial entities have different approaches. Some have proposed to me that we actually do a race day count, and if there's X amount of races minus, well, we would take X amount off the fee. Others would see that we're just as active on social media and in the esport world. So it's not one size fits all. I think the sporting sponsorship world, but even the wider commercial world, is having to readjust in light of this ongoing COVID situation and change our contracts accordingly. But we've been very lucky. If anything, our situation during the year when we were going in to potentially partner with the Spanish entity Manuela Foundation, which then we decided not to go ahead with. We've actually had some pretty significant global brands approach our team in terms of 2021 and beyond, the commercial partnerships. So it became aware that Mitchelton-Scott were the spot of the naming of the team was available. So in an ironic way, in a year that has been terrible for wider business community and even a tough sports sponsorship period as well, we've actually had really good engagements with some significant brands about sponsorship for next year.
What happened with the Manuela Fundación? Was that related to COVID, or was that something where you'd been exploring the partnership and it wasn't quite the right fit for other reasons?
Yeah, I think you could say it was related to COVID in the sense that the misunderstanding that came about was probably because on a deal such as this, you really need to be sitting down with people face to face for 2 or 3 days and having a lunch and having a dinner and getting to know them, because Jerry Ryan, who's our team owner, has created this team 9 years ago, and he really feels like it's his baby. And in passing that baby over to somebody, you need to really know them. And it was probably rushed a little bit too much in the excitement of a potential sponsor. And then, midway through, we realized that it wasn't the right fit, so we took corrective action. And that's when Jerry also asked me, it was in mid-June actually, to step in and become the chairman of the team and make plans for the next number of years.
What else did you learn during that period where there wasn't any racing, and you talked about what you were trying to do digitally with Zwift and so forth? What did you learn about what assets you have available, but also equally how important the actual road races are to your visibility and what you can offer your partners?
I think at the very base of it, we're an amazing sporting organization that has men and women competing around the world in upwards of 320 race days a year. So the visibility that delivers could never be replicated by Zwift rides, etc. So our sport is magic because it literally has the best athletes in the world going by your kitchen window, and it goes into cities and towns and through amazing landscapes, and that's what I think makes the fan base so loyal to cycling, is just the amazing nature of the sport, and what it does with the races, where it goes. But I think we also quickly realized that, and it was happening anyway. Zwift has become an important, and East Sport cycling has become an important element to bring people in that might not normally be on a bicycle. If you're living in a high-rise skyscraper in Hong Kong or Singapore or wherever, being able to get up on Zwift and have rides with people around the world digitally, it's fantastic. So we'd already been a close partner of Zwift's. In fact, going back as far as 2016, when one of our riders, Matthew Heyman, broke his arm. He trained on Zwift and he ended up winning Paris-Roubaix. So we've always had a very close relationship with Zwift, and we've seen that world really develop. And what COVID did was give it an incredible turbo boost this year. But already, even before the lockdown and the COVID situation, the International Olympic Committee were discussing that esports cycling could be the first esport to enter the Olympic family, because it's actually doing the sport, the physical sport, as opposed to just using your thumbs on a control. So we'd recognize that that element of our business is becoming more important. In fact, I'll give you an example. Yesterday, with a global brand that I've been in talks with since January, so through the lockdown. Yesterday, we had 2 virtual rides with this company. One was in the morning, which had UK, Germany, Singapore, Hong Kong, and Australian executives from this company on a Zwift and Zoom ride with Simon Yates, Amanda Spratt, and Darrell Impey. And Phil Liggett was the MC. And then in the afternoon, with the same company, we had executives from New York, Chicago, Mexico, Costa Rica, Colombia, riding with Esteban Chavez and Lucy Kennedy, Luke Durbridge. So having our athletes, even the Monday before the Tour de France, being able to engage with potential sponsors to show them what it can be like in terms of activations with our riders, that sort of thing is just becoming a really important tool in our business model.
Yeah, and I guess looking over the next 3 weeks, you think of how much of the spectacle of the Tour de France is going to be missing outside of the race itself. You're not going to have the same kind of race village environment on each leg, and you're not going to have the same opportunities from your perspective commercially to activate through hospitality or through experiential things on site. So does that digital element now become more significant over these 3 weeks as well?
Absolutely. The both the ASO and the UCI have extremely strict protocols. I spoke to one of our sponsors this morning who will be in Monaco, and he's going to cycle over to Nice just to say hello. But normally he would be in our team car in the first stage. So it is having an impact on that. But I think what we're all accepting is, listen, there are certain things that normally would happen that are not going to happen during the 3 weeks. But if we can start in Nice and make it to Paris and have the televisual, as well as there will be some spectators, but just obviously not taking selfies with riders, not getting up close and personal with the riders. So we're all accepting that it's not business as usual, but if we can pull it off together and make some spectacular racing for the television audience, I think that'll be a big victory.
And what are some of the conversations you've had with your partners about how to make good on that difference? How to get the most out of the visibility you have on the media side, given that some of those other opportunities aren't going to be open in 2020.
Yeah, again, the sponsors also live in the real world, and they know that we can't do the impossible. So it's a case of, I'm not saying it's a case of suck it up, but everyone is realistic as to what we can do, and we're pushing a bit more on social media, doing some other fan engagements on sponsor behalf, on behalf of the sponsor, that'll give them some extra value. So it's such a complex sport, and particularly something like the Tour de France, we have the logistics are just enormous. In the lead up, we've got riders and staff members doing recons on the stages. We've got everything from the mechanic side to the health and wellness side of our team to the commercial side, all pulling in the same direction. So sponsors, certainly in cycling, and given the current situation, are very forgiving if there are certain elements of their normal rights package are not going to be available. So we've had open and frank discussions with all our commercial partners to say, listen, this is what we can do, and everybody's in agreement. So we're lucky to have good partners like that.
This is the Sports Pro podcast.
Looking outside the tour specifically and how this calendar has unfolded, obviously it's been shifted back through the year. So the competition for attention, I guess, is completely different because every other sport has had its calendar shifted as well. But you've had quite an intense block of races, and you obviously have a different set of plans for where you're going to be and when, on the media side as well as on the racing side. How has that affected your strategy? Has it been have you just been improvising and hanging on and trying to get through 2020, or did you have a different kind of set of strategic goals that you were able to put in place in time for this season?
Well, our racing goals have not changed. We we plan our racing season, this 2020 racing season, last October, November, and we already had Esteban and Adam leading a Tour de France team going after stages. We had Simon leading the Giro, going for the overall win. Now, the fact that they've changed from July to August and from May to October, it actually hasn't changed our strategy in terms of the races. So what the riders have done with our sports and sport directors and trainers is basically try to change their fitness peaks for this. Once we got the new calendar out, it was like, okay, we've got a peak for such a date, and change the training accordingly. So on that sporting side, really on the helicopter picture, our strategy hasn't changed at all. Logistically, obviously, things changed massively, but in terms of our aims for the year, they haven't really changed.
Obviously, the men's team is one half of the operation. You also have a women's world tour team who are racing alongside them, or racing on their tours, on their calendar. What has this done to the visibility of women's cycling this year? Is it a setback?
Well, I think we'd all agree that women's cycling is really on a big upswing. Later this year we'll have the first ever women's Paris-Roubaix. I attended Strade Bianche, where our reigning world champion Annemiek van Vleuten won in just absolutely incredible style. And in the commercial landscape, the more global brands I'm talking to, in terms of any engagement with cycling, they see the sustainability, the gender equality, and the esports as three real strong pillars in cycling. So the women's calendar has been, I guess, growing, even though COVID has created the same challenges for the women's calendar as it has for the men's. I know the Bowls Tour in the Netherlands was cancelled, but I think everyone's doing their best. And what we see next year is a new multi-day stage race going to take place in Norway. And I did see recently as well about the new Women's Tour de France. So women's cycling is in a good place. It's challenged just like the men's in terms of this year, but we've had a women's team right from the beginning, and if anything, we're putting more resources behind the women's team for various reasons, because they deserve it. It's a really important element of our business, and I think the girls are happy to get out there and focus on the races that have been put in place. In fact, I think Annemiek, our champion at the moment, a few minutes ago she crashed in Grand Prix of Plouay in torrential rain, but she's I've just got a message that she's back in the group. So hail, rain, or sunshine, the girls give it 100%.
And how do you see that women's team developing commercially? Are you looking for different sets of partners, different audiences? What's your strategy there?
We're open to potentially a different partner. But the more, I guess that some significant commercial conversations have gone on this year and continue to progress, the more I see it as a complete package. They complement each other. The men's and the women's team, more and more we have them racing together. You go to Strade Bianche, our teams are in the same hotel. They're going to the start finish in the same bus. You'll see it at Paris-Roubaix, you see it at Flèche Wallonne, you see it at Liège-Bastogne-Liège. I'm a big fan of that. I'm a big fan of the women's racing being very close to the men's racing in terms of commercially, in terms of sporting sense, and in terms of actual promotion of races. So we see it as a complete package in a commercial sense.
Another thing I wanted to talk about is just the profile of cycling generally. Obviously, we haven't seen racing through the summer, but what we're perhaps seeing an acceleration of, particularly here in Europe, is a change to transport strategies and perhaps again another step up in terms of the significance of cycling to people's lives. More people being encouraged to commute by bike in order to reduce pressure and circulation levels on public transport, etc., etc. Do you how far do you respond to trends like that, and how far do you kind of is that something that is felt a little bit further down the line for someone in your position selling sponsorship for a professional road team?
I must say, I do believe there's a strong trickle down effect from government decisions to sport. I mean, you only have to look at the UK 25 years ago. It was government funding of the sport of cycling that made the UK go from a kind of making up the numbers to one of the strongest performers in world championship and Olympic cycling. So I did the lockdown from Italy, but I consume Irish and British news, and I see a new government formed in Dublin about 5 weeks ago, and they committed to over €1 million a day for the next 5 years for cycling infrastructure. I see Boris Johnson committing to $2 billion for cycling infrastructure. There's no doubt in my mind that that type of investment in public support and public infrastructure for cycling has a positive effect on the sport of cycling, because at the end of the day, you're going to see companies will be engaging with governments, and they see cycling as a positive hot topic, and it's making a positive impact on people's lives. I grew up in a bike shop, and I know the positive impact it makes on somebody who may have driven into work for 20 years and decides to buy a bike, and then all of a sudden it transforms their life in terms of happiness and how healthy they are. So I'd be a big believer that this global reawakening of how positive a thing the bicycle can be in the streets of Paris or the streets of Bogota and Colombia, or London or Dublin or anywhere, it is only going to be a good thing for the professional end of cycling, because more bums on bikes is ultimately going to lead to a better engagement with the sport as well. So I'm very pleased that out of a horrible global pandemic like this COVID-19 thing has been, that cycling is going to be one of the few, what you might say, beneficiaries. I know from the commercial side of the business of bicycles, big brands that I talk to are, the warehouses are empty. So that's only a positive thing for the sport of cycling. Don't mean to obviously be too positive about this crisis, but certainly the bicycle business and the sport of cycling might benefit from it.
And finally, what are your hopes and expectations for the next couple of weeks or so, next 3 weeks?
Hopes are we make it to Paris. All the teams in good shape with no positive COVID situations. Sporting sense, we've got 8 riders. Every one of them is capable of winning a stage or multiple stages. I know last year we won 4 stages, and it was a really superb Tour de France. We're going in with a very similar mindset. It's a really tough tour. Not that any tour is easy, but this one, particularly in the last week, is very tough. So we're going to be shaking it up and be very visible and aggressive. And we're also quite a team that's very well known for having a bit of fun along the way. So we'll have a good laugh and put the hammer down and try and win some important stages.
All right, well, best of luck with it, Darach, and thanks again for your time.
Thank you, Owen.
Join the conversation with the SportsPro community. Follow us on Twitter @SportsPro. Find us on Instagram @sportspro.media. And connect to SportsPro Media on LinkedIn, where you can also become a part of our specialist OTT community. SportsPro, connecting and inspiring the business world of sport.
Okay, that is it for another SportsPro podcast. Thanks again for Darach McQuaid for his time there. Thanks as well to Guy Voisin.
Thank you.
And to Mike Rich.
Thanks, Owen.
Thanks to all of you for listening. We'll be back again very soon. Enjoy the tour if you're watching it, and speak again. Bye-bye.
The SportsPro podcast is published by SportsPro Media. The producer is Ed Dixon.